As I reflect on the patients that we've had and experienced over the years, including folks who have been in the worst kind of weight crises and the worst kind of behavioral crises, and both at the same time, the concepts that I'm going to teach you in the next 20 minutes have worked for all, but I can only think one. And if my memory were perfect, maybe it would be 2, 3, or 4. But it is just amazing how effective this is. When it's done perfectly, it's almost perfectly effective. But no one can do it perfectly. So the results are, of course, depend on the real world. But it is extremely effective. And the first reason I think for this, and what I'm going to say here is totally my own opinion. It's based somewhat on research, but it is observations and comments by parents that have brought this home to us. First place, it's useful to separate in your mind the concepts of hunger or lack of satiety. And the evidence seems to be, the research evidence, is that the problem with Prader-Willi syndrome is more a lack of satiety, even in the extreme, a lack of feeling uncomfortably full at times, rather than hunger. Now, none of us can go inside the experience of the individual, but at least for the majority of individuals, this seems to be true. People have misinterpreted the ability to eat a lot as hunger, because that's what's true for the rest of us. If we're very hungry, we eat more. We've also interpreted the focus on food as hunger. But again, if you separate out the focus and obsessiveness from actual needs, you will see and can see that this is really not hunger. And there does seem to be evidence, both from watching our children eat and from actual brain scans during eating, that they get a kick out of food that the rest of us don't. How many have observed that? Yes. That works to our advantage, because they can really, really enjoy things that the rest of us really would not get a big kick out of. And they look forward to food in a way that the rest of us don't really look forward to it. We really aren't thinking about food until we get hungry. But they can be thinking about food all the time, but we can help them. We can help rescue them from that life. What we do know from scientific evidence is that the sense of satiety is delayed. That is, they do get some sense of fullness. Some of them will slow down after they've had free access to food, but they will slow down after having consumed as much as 3 times as many calories as a normal obese person would eat. And the satiety is incomplete. That is, they could always override it if something really good is there. And that's true somewhat for the rest of us. How many times have you piled on something really tasty only because it was really tasty at the end of a meal? For them, that is blunted as well, so that if something's really good to eat, almost nothing will stop the taking in of those calories. And the satiety is over with typically 1 to 2 hours after being experienced. There's some other things. Babies with Prader-Willi syndrome tend not to cry. Is that because they are weak, or it's because they aren't particularly hungry? The person with Prader-Willi syndrome, and I've seen this over and over again, they tolerate a very low-calorie diet without complaints of hunger. And when we have brought patients in to the hospital, placed them on very low-calorie diets, and I always ask after a couple of days, are you getting enough to eat? Oh, yeah. Are you hungry? No. Because they are getting enough to eat. You saw that big tray of food. We also see the phenomenon that people with Prader-Willi syndrome frequently go on hunger strikes if they're angry enough. And sometimes when their weight gets too low, or for other reasons that we're not quite sure of, say during a significant illness, they may stop eating altogether. And that's one of the reasons I worry about obesity surgery in these individuals, because I think we might end up in the opposite problem of actually having individuals who lose too much weight So far, the obesity procedures that have been tried, I am not impressed that they've been particularly effective. I think they're very dangerous because of the poor awareness of abdominal pain, and also the willingness to eat to the point of doing damage, internal damage, is there in a small number of individuals. And I think they are setups for that once you do a restrictive procedure. And finally, we sometimes do see this excessive weight loss. And it's very hard to get these folks to start eating again. The problem that parents sometimes get into is that they must choose, they feel they must choose between controlling the behavior or controlling the weight. That as soon as they start to try to control the weight, they end up with behavior problems that are quite frankly intolerable. And so they back off, understandably, and then the weight creeps up. And that's very understandable, and that's kind of a spiraling crisis that needs an intervention. We can manage both the weight and the behavior with the same techniques. Today I'm going to give you a lot of tools. And the next lecture also will contain a lot of tools. You will, as parents, need only some of these tools. As providers, you will probably end up using most of these tools because you're dealing with a number of different individuals. So I don't want to frighten parents of younger children. When you hear all the things I'm going to suggest, I don't want you to think, oh my gosh, I can never do all of that. But these are the things that we've learned have worked extremely well in individuals who are particularly a problem and difficult. But some of these tools should be used with everyone. And the tool is food security. And let's define it. Food security, what it's not. Food security is not come automatically with weight control. And we've actually seen individuals who have weight under control, but because they do not have food security, they have significant behavior problems. It's all about managing expectations. Now, take a look at this tray really closely. There are a couple of things I want you to notice about it. If you look for the calories on this tray, you'll spot them. There's the bread and the meat. But the bulk of the tray are what we call the green foods, very low-calorie foods that the individual can have not in unlimited amounts, but at meal times in large amounts. And then I also want you to notice in the upper right-hand corner are little packets of salad dressing and sauce. And sometimes hot sauce is really particularly popular. These are all very low-calorie things, but these little packets are great because there's no debate about how much you get. You get the same amount every meal, and there's no arguing about pouring on a little more or dishing out a little bit more. So taking things out of containers can be a source of problems for some people. So that's a trick that's well worthwhile for families who are getting into those debates or who are just establishing food security. Go to a bulk Sam's Club or someplace else where you can buy those packets in cases, and that can be very helpful. The other thing is that almost all of the patients go straight for the calories first. They eat the meat and they eat the bread, and then they start munching on the salad and the broccoli and the other items. I think that this actually has a physiologic as well as a psychologic benefit. Psychologically, obviously, they're still eating while you're still eating. In fact, they may be eating long after you're done eating. Okay, that works in your favor. The other thing is that, remember I said satiety is delayed? That means that the satiety that they are going to get from the calories in the meat and the bread is going to have time for its onset while they're working on the salad and the broccoli and opening all the little packages. That's another thing, is opening all those little packages slows you down. Okay, and it occupies them, they enjoy it. The more of a ceremony and big deal the meal is, the better. So all of these things work to your advantage, and the most important thing is that the individual is getting what he expected to get. And here's somebody enjoying a 200-calorie lunch. She does not look deprived. She does not feel deprived. She has plenty to eat. Look at all those dishes. Food security you can break down into two concepts. Simple concepts you can keep in your head all the time when you're problem solving at home. No doubt, no hope, because your goal is no disappointment. The reason for this is doubt leads to anxiety, and anxiety leads to stress. Hope leads to disappointment, which is also a stress. And you're going to hear us say multiple times today that stress is a major source of behavior problems. So let's start with no doubt. People with Prader-Willi syndrome will worry about food in a way that would never cross our minds. Okay? So they need lots of reassurance that the food is there, it's coming, and it will be on time. Have you noticed this? And your tools here are a pre-planned menu and a schedule. The menu tells them what they're going to eat, and the schedule tells them when they're going to eat. The menu, for some individuals, they might only need to know what they're going to be eating today. But some of our brighter individuals who can read, who can think ahead, they do well with a 3-week cycle. And in a lot of the group homes, we recommend that you have a 3-week menu posted, and then you go through the cycle again. You want to list the items. They will get used to what the quantities are. For younger children, if this is a big issue, you may even use pictures, or for non-readers. And we work in pre-planned rewards, and we do a pre-planned red food. Remember that red food at the top of the pyramid. No doubt. When it comes to meals away from home, they need to know what to expect. And if mom has to go away, they need to know that someone else is going to be providing the food, if that's the routine. It would never occur to another child that because mom's going away for a day, they might not eat. But for a child with Prader-Willi syndrome, that could be a major source of anxiety, stress, and behavior problems. And you never knew what hit you. The schedule. The schedule covers all activities, and the reason for this is that it helps keep them oriented. You aren't speaking so much of the meals being at a certain time, so much as the meal is going to happen after this other activity is going to happen, because they understand that. That's a lot more concrete, and it keeps them on task with their other activities. Our recommendation is 3 meals a day and 1 snack, planned snack in the evening. Not very spontaneous with the snacks. In fact, we avoid that. So the schedule provides a sequence of events more than an hourly or minute type of layout. But first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and then we're going to eat. Then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to go for our walk, and then we're going to eat. Okay? And that keeps them moving through the day. We provide them, if necessary, with visual cues, and a lot of schools do this, where the schedule can be posted in the classroom to keep the child on schedule, thinking about what's happening next, and then we're going to eat. We reinforce it frequently verbally with reminders. And Dr. Forster is going to talk a lot about why these reminders are needed. If there are going to be breaks in your routine or schedule, you need to anticipate them, or you could have a behavioral meltdown. And give your child reassurance about these breaks and that you have a plan. We have a plan. The second part of food security sounds cruel, but it's called no hope. Hope comes when there is an opportunity for food that's not on the schedule. So this is why we do these things. We lock the food and keep it inaccessible. And I think you've probably heard stories, some of our parents, older parents, know that sometimes the individual will come to you and say, you forgot to lock the refrigerator. They don't want that doubt and hope. They don't want that anxiety. Please lock this up so I can stop thinking about it. So the locks are a psychological food security as much as they are a physical food security. If it's a situation where food is accessible, they have to have supervision. That's your man-to-man defense. Trips to the grocery store, I wrote no trips to the grocery store, but again, they should be limited. It depends on your experience. It depends on whether or not the child can handle the uncertainty, but that certainly can be a source of anxiety, and it sometimes has to be eliminated. Trips to restaurants have to be pre-planned. You should never walk into a restaurant or a party without your child knowing exactly what he's going to be getting. And that can make trips to the restaurant really very matter of fact. If there's a history of problems around this, it is a process to retrain the child. Participation in food preparation, again, I wrote no participation, but really, again, this depends on experience. So somebody can be snapping the green beans and cutting up the vegetables. Other foods that are easy to pop into your mouth would not be appropriate. Some individuals have to be kept out of the kitchen altogether. That's one of the rules that just has to be. During meal times, when the kitchen is unlocked, you need to be in the living room, or whatever the rule is. It depends on your experience. Serving bowls can be a problem. A lot of families have successfully learned that they simply prepare the plate in the kitchen and present it to the individual, and as long as he gets what he's expecting, usually this is not a problem. No seconds. Again, some families like to have seconds, and so they hide some food, and then if the child asks for seconds, they give him seconds, and it was really already on their diet plan. The only problem with that is that they are reinforcing a behavior that you don't want to encourage, which is asking for food and then rewarding that. However, I think the way to do it is to follow the principle of no doubt. Put the seconds on a second plate, put it next to the first plate, and set it right there at the beginning of the meal. Here's your dinner. Here are your seconds. Everybody gets seconds, but yours are right here. You know what they are. No doubt, no hope, and no asking. And I think that's possibly the way to deal with seconds. Careful planning for special occasions. Again, as soon as you're aware that there's a special occasion coming up, before your child, we hope, hears about the occasion, you have to have a plan, and when you present the special occasion to your child, you let them know what the plan is. Giving in. No giving in. This is deadly because it buys you some time and peace now, but you pay the high price later. And this is hard for relatives to understand. And later on I'm going to talk about team building, and part of your team building will be to get them to think through what actually happens when you give in. Do not negotiate about food. So you have to learn to be a little hard-nosed and say, well, that's the way it is. Don't get drawn into discussions about what's right or some external 10 commandments about food that someone has just made up. No unplanned treats. Because if there's an unplanned treat, then you have introduced a hope and a possibility for an unplanned treat. And the child can start expecting an unplanned treat when it's the farthest thing from your mind. And then you get disappointment, and then you get behavior problems. And money, for most individuals in adulthood, should not have access to pocket money because most of them figure out what to do with it. So in order to prevent false hope, it comes when there's opportunity, when there's unsupervised time, when the locks are unlocked, when the food is left out, friends are over, siblings. This is probably one of the tougher things that families have to deal with, is training all these friends. But you just simply have to have house rules, and the youngsters coming over have to learn those house rules. And if you have to post them for the friends, that's okay too. Parties, birthdays, holidays, you have to have a plan going into all of those, and sometimes you have to train your family, your extended family, ahead of time. Some families go to the party, stay for an hour, and then someone takes the child home, and then the food comes out. But a grazing opportunity, a big table laden with food, for many children this is just too much. They can't handle it. I'm going to be very interested because I've already seen a number of children who have grown up with food security who can handle those situations, and that's very interesting. But as I pointed out with the family of 3 children, it's not just how you manage them. The children themselves are different. There is a variability. And so if your child is a particularly aggressive food seeker, it may be, no matter what, that was going to be the case. But I do think that a long experience with food security minimizes that behavior. Any past history of making exceptions, of course, this is the long-term effects of giving in, and the temptation to say just this once, because there's no such thing as just this once. Okay. We use food for rewards, and this is very, very controversial, but I think there is a way to do it because food is a huge incentive for people with Prader-Willi syndrome, and you need incentives. But this is, here are some principles that have worked very, very well, even for some very tough folks. First place, your dietitian will tell you that there are free foods. You know, foods that the individual can consume in large amounts anytime, and they will not put on weight. That is true with respect to the weight, but it's not true with respect to the behavior. The free foods create doubts and hopes. So we recommend that your free foods become part of your plan for providing an incentive to get through the day. So use all of your free foods. By this I mean, say, a diet beverage and sugarless gum are extremely useful incentives during the day. You can use food like a diet beverage after exercise or other unwanted tasks. But you simply schedule these things as part of the routine. You do not make this up as you go along, because you don't want to create any doubts or hopes. The more consistent you can be about this, the fewer problems you will have. The other thing is, if you have a food that you're using as a reward, it can't be too special, because the child has to be able to handle the disappointment. And he has to be able to look forward to the next time he qualifies for the reward. So the schedule we often use is that the child gets some sugarless gum at the end of a good morning, he gets some sugarless gum at the end of a good afternoon, and then he gets a calorie-free beverage after the exercise session. So as soon as he loses something, it wasn't that big a deal. He can handle it, maybe. And the other thing is, he can immediately be aware that there's another opportunity right around the corner. And these are some of the things. I don't recommend that diet sodas be provided free. In fact, I don't recommend that people with Prader-Willi syndrome have access to any flavored beverage freely. These need to be used as part of the incentive of their schedule. There are two reasons for this. One is you lose the incentive benefit if they just have free access, but the other is that they will simply overdo it. And they do seem to be somewhat extra sensitive to water intoxication. And these calorie-free beverages are basically just water. And this problem is particularly true on certain medications. So you should be aware of that. But even without medications, these things should be used in a restricted way. And we have found that diet soda is a huge incentive if an individual has done his exercise all 6 days of the week without any problems. There's that diet soda, and they really relish that. Bags of veggies, save these for special occasions, not free access on a normal situation in the normal course of events. But you want to use these when other people are eating a lot or grazing, picnics and things like that. And again, as soon as your child hears about the picnic or the party, you remind him of what he's going to get and that he's also going to have his bag of veggies. Avoid spontaneity, because it turns into capriciousness, and your child just can't handle it. Plan your exceptions, you hope, before your child thinks of it. Tell them about the special occasion or the exception. Be specific. We're going to Aunt Mary's for Thanksgiving, and she's going to have a pumpkin pie, and I am going to cut you a piece this big. Again, with some individuals, you don't need to be that specific, but other individuals, you need to be that specific, and then hold your line. Don't make an exception, and if you say the piece of pumpkin pie is going to be a certain size, and you might cut it out of a piece of paper if you need to. But if you say that size, then don't surprise them with a little bigger piece. Why not? Because next time, you will have raised some hopes. So stick to your guns. Okay, and again, the exception should not be too momentous. It's never good to say, we're going to Haas's, and since your weight has been under such great control, you can have anything you want. They can't handle it. Even if their weight is not threatened, it's too exciting. And there's a great story about an individual who was made a promise about that for a very special family occasion, and he became so excited he totally melted down and had to leave. Phrasing is everything. When you are saying no, make sure it sounds like you're saying yes. It's a little craftiness I want to teach you, but if you have to say that lunch will be delayed, what you want to say is, we're going to be doing this and then we're having lunch. You want to restructure it into a positive statement, okay? You will never want to say, you know, if you don't get this done, if you don't make your bed and find your shoes, you're going to be too late for the bus and you won't get any breakfast. You never want to threaten with loss of food, even if it seems like a logical, natural consequence. What you want to say is, hurry up and get on your shoes so we have time for breakfast. Now, there is a hidden threat in there, but you never want to state it that way. So your phrasing is everything, and you're taking advantage of a trait of the children, which is sometimes concrete thinking, so that they get the implication, but you don't want to make it too specific for them. Now, I think there's something called silent hope. And I picture a submarine or Jaws under the surface here, waiting to jump up and bite you. Silent hope, I think, happens when you go into a situation where the child has experienced food before, but you aren't thinking about food. And I like to give the image of a mother who takes her child to the library when he's small for story hour. And lo and behold, they have cupcakes. Well, his weight's been okay, and here we are, what are you going to do? So he has his cupcake. And I'm not judging that at all. However, 3 years later, when Mom is going back to return a book, which presumably is very overdue, she walks into the library thinking about the book. Her child walks into the library thinking about cupcakes. And before she knows it, there's been a then as she leaves the library, the child has a meltdown because he got in and out of the library and there were no cupcakes. This is silent hope. It leads to disappointment. And I just want to mention it so that even when you are doing your best and you're doing everything right, sometimes you are going to get blindsided with this phenomenon. And it's not because you did anything wrong. It's just the nature of the syndrome. So my final pitch is that with food security, you are managing behavior and weight. And you want to provide food security even when the weight, and especially when the weight, is under control. Because if you don't, you may have behavior problems that really could be managed and eliminated, even eliminated, if your child has near perfect or as good as you can get food security. Thank you.